Hi, here we are with the Chapter 1 essay. Chapter 1 is Why Do We Create Monsters? So this is how we're starting off our semester, kind of examining this issue, right? Of why do we create monsters? Because we create them, right? Human beings create the monsters that we have. We create the monsters that scare us, right? So why in the world do we do such a thing? Why would we even want to? So we're going to examine that in Chapter 1. It says, write an essay in which you respond to one of the following questions taken from Monsters, Chapter 1. Of course, this is from the second edition, so if you go looking through here and you see that you don't have all these essays, it's because you have the wrong edition of Monsters. You should have the second edition with the green dragon on the cover. Now, these are the different authors, okay, King, Hitchcock, Del Toro and Hogan, Klossman Brothers, Lowry, and Asma. I talk about these authors a little bit on Canvas in the video that I have that introduces Chapter 1, right? So if you're in the Chapter 1 module, as you should be, please take a look at that. And of course, we're also writing about these essays in our discussion threads, okay? Especially in the second week, if I'm not mistaken here. But what you need to do is you need to read all these articles, all right, all the essays that we have in Chapter 1. The only one that we don't have a question for is probably in many ways the most exciting one, which is a passage from Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. Okay, Mary Shelley's famous story of Frankenstein. Okay, read that one too. So read all these and look at these questions and just see kind of which one strikes your fancy. What do you get most excited about? Okay. Well, let's talk first about some of the issues of deadlines. Now, the final draft of the essay is due on Monday, February the 14th at 11:59 p.m. Yes, I am aware that that's Valentine's Day, but that is not a national holiday. Sorry. Be sure to follow the out-of-class essay guidelines for matters of format and style. And if you haven't read the guidelines, please do so. I'm pretty serious about these guidelines. They are on Canvas, okay, in your introduction module. There is a video that goes with it. And if you ever have any questions about anything in the guidelines, please just shoot me a message or an email or come visit me in my office hour, and we can most certainly talk about that. Be sure to include a word count at the end of your essay. It's no big deal. It's just, you just write it down. You can take a look at the sample essay for Chapter 1. You can see how it's done. It's, as I said, not really a big issue. Remember, you must meet minimum requirements, including word count, sources, and subject matter, right? That's really important that you do that. So if this is a 1,000-word essay and you turn in a 600-word essay, guess what? Not going to pass. No late essays will be accepted without a signed doctor's note or other verified excuse, okay? That's very important that you understand that up front. Now, the first thing that we need to do is to create a thesis statement and topic outline. Now, there is a sample on Canvas that you should look at. I have a video that goes with that sample. This will be due on Friday, February the 4th, 11:59 p.m. I also want to make sure you include at least one source. I want to see a citation entry. What is it going to look like in your Works Cited page? The source could be one of the essays from the textbook, so that makes it really easy. And again, you have some handouts on MLA, and you specifically have a Chapter 1 MLA handout, so you can, again, see how, for instance, one of the articles might be put into a Works Cited. A participation grade is assigned for this, okay? Now, after the February deadline, I'm going to look these over, get back to you very quickly. Of course, it has to be very quick. Then the class is going to be divided into peer editing groups. Now, how we do this online is a lot of fun, but you do have to kind of know how to do it. And if you've never done it before in another class, I am going to post instructions on Canvas on how to do that, okay? You will be submitting a rough draft to the Canvas work group that you're a part of and to me on Wednesday, February the 9th. Okay, that again is February the 9th. That will be again 11:59 p.m. date. Sorry, it's not there, but that you have the full day, right? You have the full day. Then submit the peer editing sheets to your Canvas work group and to me by Friday, February the 11th, 11:59 p.m. Pardon me. So what that does is it gives you an opportunity to look at each other's rough drafts, make some comments about them. But in looking at other people's work is also a really good way to reflect back on your own work as well. Now, the minimum requirements here. This is very important that we follow these requirements, that we know what we're doing. Okay. The word count means has to be at least a minimum of 1,000, and this little thing right here, the squiggly line, that means about 1,400 words. I don't mind if you're over 1,400 words. I do mind if you have fewer than 1,000 words. Okay, I want to see some good development. Okay, so roughly speaking, this should be enough words to accomplish what we need to accomplish in this essay assignment. If you don't have 1,000 words, you're not accomplishing what needs to happen. Secondly, the strong essay structure, including introduction, concession, rebuttal arguments, main body, and conclusion. Now, if you haven't looked at the standard argumentative essay handout in video, these terms may not make a lot of sense to you, so you need to go and look at that, right? That is part of the instruction in this course. If you don't know what a concession is or how I'm using that term, that's because you haven't looked at that yet. So you need to look at, again, go on to Canvas, go into the introduction modules, look at the standard argumentative essay, okay? You're going to need at least citations from at least 2 sources. So 2 sources. Now, one of the sources can be from the textbook. Okay, so in other words, you want to use some of the primary text, Stephen King's article or the piece by Susan Tyler Hitchcock, right? Or one of the other pieces, whatever it might be. And then you need one other source. It could be a movie. It could be a website. It could be a book or an article that you found in the library. Right? I'm leaving this wide open for you. Now, when I say wide open, that doesn't mean I want something that's terrible. Obviously, I want good, credible source materials, right? And you can always use more. Okay, so if I say 2 sources, that doesn't mean you cannot have more than 2 sources. You may certainly have more than 2 sources if you wish. Okay. Mla Format and Presentation and Documentation, including correct works cited list. Please use the handouts on Canvas if you need help. Many of you may already know MLA, but some of you do not, and I assume that people do not, so I have the Canvas help for you. You have the MLA handout, you have the video that goes with the MLA handout, you also have web links to Purdue OWL. Remember, OWL means Online Writing Lab, and it'll take you right to a website at Purdue University that shows correct MLA format. Okay, and there's some other web links and videos as well that many of my students have found valuable over the years. Now, let's just go back and take a peek at the questions themselves, or the articles. So Stephen King is our first author, Why We Crave Horror Movies. I want you to read that, obviously. The question in Making Connections asks us to think about this issue about the need for horror. Do we really need horror in our lives? Well, we must. A lot of us must, because it's clearly a huge deal. You can see that in our entertainment industry, but you can also see it in literature. You can see it in the history books, right? All these things are there. And so this is something that you can possibly think about and write about. So Stephen King, the famous horror writer, talks about basically why he has been able to make a living scaring people. Now, the next article, as I said, is a passage from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I would really encourage you to read this, keeping in mind how different this passage is from what you may have seen in the movies or how you traditionally think of the monster, right? Because when we look at Mary Shelley's novel, Dr. Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is the person, the doctor who creates the monster, he reacts very, very differently to the creation of that monster than in the movies, right? You have that classic movie from the 1930s where the doctor is triumphant. It's alive! It's alive! But actually in Mary Shelley, the doctor runs away. And that's very, very important in understanding what's going on with the monster. Susan Tyler Hitchcock's work called Conception is a piece from a larger book talking about the creation of Frankenstein, the story by Mary Shelley. And it details the very famous challenge in which the literary genius Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley, two great poets who are still studied in English literature classes, and Mary Shelley, who was at that time very, very young, very new and inexperienced, and a guy by the name of John Polidori and Mary Shelley's half-sister were all ensconced in Geneva, Switzerland in 1816. But what's interesting if you read Conception is what was going on in the world at the time of 1816 and how it really influenced the creation of the Frankenstein story. Lord Byron said one day to his friends, "Why don't we each think of a horror story?" And the irony is, while Byron was a great poet and Percy Bysshe Shelley, was a great poet, they really didn't come up with anything great. Mary Shelley came up with Frankenstein. And also, John Polidori, a name you may have never heard before, he came up with the vampire story, the modern vampire, the one that combines the blood-sucking monster with the charismatic, attractive, seductive individual. It was his idea of the vampire that Bram Stoker, almost 80 years later, turned into Count Dracula. Del Toro and Hogan. You may be familiar with the name Guillermo del Toro. He's a pretty famous director in Hollywood. And he and Chuck Hogan write this piece called Why Vampires Never Die. In other words, why have they been so popular? And it introduces several key ideas of the vampire mythology that you may never have thought of before. It's not just because it's played by Robert Pattinson or somebody like that, right? There's more to it. Chuck Klosterman, My Zombie Myself, introduces the zombie myth. And he has a different take on it. He has a take on it that is kind of unusual in that it goes against what we might call the normal or stereotypical view of the zombie myth. Brothers, Peter H. Brothers, takes us to Godzilla, a lot of people's favorite monster. Certainly an incredibly popular monster. Many, many movies have been made with Godzilla, not to mention video games, Halloween costumes, toys, etc., etc., etc. Brothers talks about Godzilla as a creation that comes out of the experience in Japan of World War II, and most especially, of course, the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the aftermath of that, and the national psychological trauma that was experienced, and how that's reflected in the creation of this monster, Godzilla. Clarice Lowry picks up a new idea, right? Whereas you can look at, for instance, monsters like Frankenstein coming from a very specific piece of literature, or Godzilla coming from a very specific movie. Lowry looks at a monster that came from the internet. She's looking at the creation of Slenderman. Now, Slenderman has been made into a movie and other video games and stuff like that, but the origin comes from the internet. Take a look at what Lowry has to say about how Slenderman came into being and why, again, this particular monster is an apt monster for our own time. The last piece is by Stephen Asma called Monsters and the Moral Imagination. And what Asma is doing is he's not looking at a particular monster, but he's looking at our use of the monster as a concept. Because, as we said, we created these monsters, right? We created Godzilla. We created Frankenstein. We created the zombie. We created the werewolf. Why? And as Mla looks at